Welcome to Unlike-Minded, a sci-fi audio anthology.
How to Survive the Apocalypse by Katie Rose Rogers. Things that matter. Hard cherries that rip easily from their stems, how your sunburn soothed under the slices of crisp red tomatoes, the fingers that dropped those ripe tomatoes onto your burnt skin and blew such chilly breath onto them, sending a shiver up your tailbone. Surviving. Surviving matters most. Her name is Darling. She knows it well. She says it to herself out loud to remember. Darling, darling, darling. She has a whole list of things she says daily. It goes, I am 17 years old. I was born in Lodi, California. In the late spring, we would pick cherries from the trees. The earthquakes came. The fires followed. Everyone is dead. Darling looks round the bunker where she's lived for the last 3 years. The walls are thick earth, the floor a cold concrete that she's covered with a quilt. Darling puts her hand to the steel bunker door and feels for warmth. If it is warm, she will not open it. But it is cold. She takes in her home one last time, sees the marks on the walls, the drawings, the discarded cans of pickled fruit, and the jugs of water she drank and used to wash. She has many books and a crank radio that she would use from time to time. That's what got her here. That radio. In the early days, the radio brought reports from people like her, those who had survived. Eventually, the voices disappeared, seemingly drowned in static. At first, the static was unnerving, but Darling missed noises besides her own breath, so she cranked the radio and listened to the hissing static to fall asleep. If it wasn't for that radio, she might have died in the bunker. But this morning, the static was interrupted with a small voice saying, "Hello." Darling's raspy voice whispered, "Hello back." In her excitement at hearing another voice besides the one in her head, she forgot that's not how these radios work. She said hello again and again, waiting for the voice to return. It took a moment, but it eventually did. Darling hugged the radio close as the voice continued. "Hello, my name is Lisbeth Allen. I am alive. I am 20 years old now. If you've survived, find me in Half Moon Bay, California. I'm not afraid anymore." A battle brewed in Darling. Her overwhelming fear and desperation for survival versus her fantastic and ever-simmering loneliness. She rushed to the map her father had placed on the wall. She put one finger on Lodi and the other on Half Moon Bay, a place she had once been to buy orchids and to watch the big waves. Her fingers were maybe an inch apart, over 100 miles. A few days' walk. A lot could happen to her in a few days. But if Lisbeth wasn't afraid anymore, Darling decided she would not be anymore either. Darling decided she would find Lisbeth. She would go to the sea. As any teenager might, Darling is struck with a sudden wave of self-consciousness. No one had seen her in years. What does she look like? There were no mirrors in the bunker. The tin cans only offer wavy, funhouse mirror approximations of her face. She feels her chin, pimple at the corner. She feels her cheeks, clear but gaunt and bony. Her hair is long, curly and frizzy. She spent many an hour twisting it between her fingers, braiding and unbraiding it. She was often naked in the bunker and knew the edges of her body well. Her hairy legs, 2 big feet, that mole by her belly button that was shaped like a salmon's tail, her sharp, sharp hip bones, the kind, soft thing between her legs that betrayed her one morning with a shock of bright red blood. And what would her mother say to the exploring she did during her long, dragging days? What would her mother do to ease the pain that came every month? Would she wash her thighs and tell her to be careful when playing with boys? Lisbeth wasn't a boy. Lisbeth wouldn't care that she wasn't beautiful. But Darling wants Lisbeth to care. Darling cares. Darling quickly braids her hair. She wraps a piece of ripped t-shirt round her face, acting as a mask, though she knows if the air is toxic, the fabric won't do much to save her. But this is her choice. One of two. She could stay in the bunker hibernating until she starves to death, or take her chances. She can't be alone anymore. Can't stand the thought of it having heard another's voice. Another girl's voice. who could be just as lonely as she has been. So she prepares, ripping the quilt into strips to wrap around her bare feet. She rips the map off the wall, puts a piece of sharpened tin in her pocket, then feels the bunker door again. Still cold. So she lowers the lever, opening the door to the sound of silence. Then a bird song, melodic and high, vaguely chaotic. Things had happened. The cherry orchard burned. Your skin is pale now. You wonder if everyone is dead, how can a bird sing so merrily? You will not sing happily at the end of the world. You will scream back. On a screen, long empty, a sagged back draped in a lab coat sits in front of it. Suddenly, we hear a scream. Darling's scream. The drooped back shoots straight up. It belongs to a woman with a dry voice that says, "There she is." We zoom in on Darling's yelling face. On the screen, we find her whole identity. Darling Moore. Her weight, so little. Her height, so tall. A man in a lab coat joins her, his voice just as dispassionate. She heard the radio. Check her radiation levels. Normal, the woman replies. Then, do we let them meet? It might contaminate the results. Things that matter. Folded notes from the boy in your science class. Plans to meet. The tick, tick, tick of rocks hitting your windowsill. Confessions of forever love. Fogged car windows and deep practicing kisses. The heavy pulse of bruised, swollen lips. Loving. Loving matters most. Her name is Lisbeth. She doesn't say it to herself as talking has become excruciating. She didn't know what was killing her, but she knew she was dying, rotting, as she had seen many the seals that had washed up on the rocky shore do. It had been 3 years of loneliness, and Lisbeth had decided that she would walk into the ocean, her pockets filled with sea rocks. She started coughing blood a month ago, and her teeth were beginning to crumble too. There was a sharp, burning pain between her shoulder blades that woke her from her sleep. She'd already started gathering the stones that would keep her underwater, but then she found a radio in the rocks outside her little shack. She wound it up slowly, listened to the fuzzy sizzle of the static, then spoke into the receiver. Her raspy voice said, "Hello, my name is Lisbeth Allen. I'm alive. I'm 20 years old now. If you survived, find me in Half Moon Bay, California. I'm no longer afraid." Things that happened. The sea left, then returned with a yawning mouth that inhaled your town, family, your first boyfriend who you planned on making love to. The waters came. You felt yourself die, and you kind of liked it. If there was a way to go, it was like this, tumbling like a rag doll, dancing impossibly in the waters. You closed your eyes, ready, but you woke up high in a sycamore tree, your athletic body a little broken, your heart completely. You eventually made your way down as the waters receded again, unaware that they carried toxic streams from the factory a few towns away. She doesn't have much time, and her survival was random. Luck, the male voice says. And how do we quantify luck? The female voice responds. Then, her radiation levels? High. A deep breath. Any signs of mutation or decay? Many. I don't think we should allow them to meet. Our data. A long pause, but the woman can't help it. Yes, of course, our data. But aren't you curious? Will Darling reach Lisbeth? And when she does, will she approach? It's not in the interest of her survival to approach. We saw what she did before. The man considers this. Will her survival mechanisms kick in again, you mean? Darling stands in the sunshine and birdsong. Her eyes are still tightly closed. She's terrified of what she will see when she opens them. Eventually she has to, though. She looks around and finds her family farm is just a dirt hill now. She dips her finger into the ashy soil, emerging with a small cherry pit. She drops it into her mouth and rolls it on her taste buds, licking off the bitter dirt until she finds a tiny, tangy bit of dried cherry clinging to the pit. She savors it, dipping her hands in the soil again, looking for more. She fills her pockets with cherry pits and then heads for the highway. Each step is careful. She must dodge the carcasses of vehicles, bodies, and trash. Even at the end of the world, you can find a plastic bottle or a rusted nail. Every time she finds a burnt-up car, she goes through it, looking for clues as to the owner. In a truck with peeling blue paint, She finds a St. Christopher's medal under the seat. She crawls over a pile of bones in the driver's seat and reaches the mirror. She finally sees her reflection. Yes, she has a blemish on her chin that she quickly picks at. Yes, she's thin, but she's happy to see her eyes again. They are grey, not blue as people had always guessed. Same colour as her mother's. For a moment she pretends she is looking into her mother's eyes, but then she remembers the last look her mother gave her, wide-eyed, angry and quick. Darling looks away. And the night is coming, which brings Darling both fear and relief. She sees the sun setting in her direction. She knows she's travelling west, but also, if Lisbeth survived, if Darling survived, perhaps others did too. She fears men most of all, men with a hunger different from hers. Darling also fears the ghost who belongs to the bones in the car. Would they haunt her too? Things that happened. At the end of the world you ran, your mother and father behind you. You approached the bunker door. You looked back at your father who had fallen. Your mother struggled to get him up. Your mother screamed, "Darling, wait." But you didn't wait. You looked at your mother one last time, then closed the bunker door over your head. You heard the clicks of the lock slipping into place. The flames bloomed, swallowed the orchard and your family, but you survived. Do you regret it yet? Lisbeth wonders if anyone has heard her call. She watches the tides recede with the moon's rise. She often wonders why she lives by the ocean still, after the ocean took so much from her. Perhaps one day her family would return with the tide, that the boy might walk out of the waters and hold her in his arms. He wouldn't be a boy anymore, as she was no longer a girl. She had dreamt it many times. He would kiss her again. He would make love to her. Lisbeth was always disappointed in the morning when she woke with her hands between her legs, horny, alone, forever. Dying doesn't take the need away. If anything, it is amplified in Lisbeth, the rage that she will die a virgin with the body of an old woman. She will kill herself tomorrow. It's time. The makeshift quilted shoes fell off Darling's feet 2 days ago. Her feet are covered in cuts and bruises now. Her pockets are empty of cherry pits, but she could smell the sea, and the birdsong changed from sweet and high to the angry, hollow shrieks of a seagull. Darling wonders if Lisbeth and her would be able to catch one of those squawking birds together. It had been so long since she had meat. Darling imagines Lisbeth as everything opposite of her. She would be short, brunette. She would be brave. Her skin would be perfect and her eyes would be brown. She would not see her mother's last betrayed look when she gazed into Lisbeth's eyes. Darling nears the ocean looking for her perfect friend. She scours the shore, sees no one. She wonders if she read her map wrong. Did Lisbeth leave? Did she die? Darling was a never-ending crier, always a screamer. She screams at herself for hoping, at the world for ending, at the horrible things she did to survive. She screams and screams until Lisbeth wakes in her makeshift house on the beach with a sudden gasp. She looks around, sees the rocks she has gathered, her pile of shells she had sharpened into various weapons and utensils. Unsure of what had woke her, Lisbeth waits until she hears Darling scream again. Lisbeth hobbles to the beach, reaching for Darling. Once they are inches apart, they stop, suddenly awkward. Aware of her odd mouth, Lisbeth apologizes, but Darling smiles. Lisbeth puts her hand out to Darling to shake, so formal for a young woman. Darling pulls her into a hug. Lisbeth lets Darling hold her. She smells Darling's hair, her muddy, earthy musk. Lisbeth asks, "How did you survive?" Before Darling can answer, the seagulls scream, fleeing the ocean as the waters recede again. Lisbeth looks at the sea with horror. She grabs Darling's hand, expecting the water to swallow them whole, but instead, a large ship emerges from the sea, silver, gleaming, spewing a bright white light. The whole world bursts around them, but Darling holds Lisbeth's hand, and Lisbeth clings to Darling. They are deliriously happy. A whole wall of screens. The two that paid footage of Darling and Lisbeth are now blank. We see the tall, thin woman in a lab coat really well for the first time. She looks like any woman with a weak chin and thick eyebrows. It's hard to believe that she is one of the architects of the end of Darling and Lisbeth's world. But she is, and the architect of many others as well. The man next to her examines the other screens. When he speaks, we recognize his dry voice. The man shakes his head, a tiny tinge of annoyance in his words now. Of all our simulations, these two are the most random. There's no data on selfishness. There's no reason to surviving a tsunami or radiation rot. If our world is to end, how can we study them? There's nothing to learn from girls. The woman seems less perturbed. We'll try again. There are ways to survive the apocalypse. Have heart. And the test subjects? What do we do with them? Let them die naturally. Together? Things that matter. Darling found Lisbeth. Lisbeth found Darling. They always dreamt of a connection like this. Their room was bigger than Darling's bunker and warmer than Lisbeth's shed. The walls were white when they arrived, but with each monthly cycle the girls found ways to decorate them with their blood, horrifying the scientists who studied their every move. Lisbeth continued to rot slowly, and Darling took care of her knowing that she too would fall apart. But surviving didn't matter anymore. Loving Lisbeth was Darling's apology to her mother, her only act of defiance of a long-dead world. And something had changed in Darling and Lisbeth's body. The rot remained, but with it came a hunger. One night, Lisbeth asked Darling if she could have a small nibble of a fingernail. The night after, a cuticle. Then the thumb. Things that happened. Lisbeth died first. The hunger Lisbeth had spread to Darling, and with it the decay. When they came to collect Lisbeth's body, Darling bit and scratched, found the bones of their watchers to be softer than a cherry pit. Things that matter. The many screens you watch every day, the worlds you thought might survive, the side bets you made with your male counterpart, your secret hope that Darling and Lisbeth might live. Your world matters most. The female scientist has a name, Clara, but no one calls her by it. Not in this room. Surely not her partner. She was given this task years ago. Find a way to save the world. Hasten the deaths of other worlds. Study the survivors. This is how we survive, she was told. But she made a mistake. Her curiosity at Lisbeth's and Darling's connection. She should never have let them meet, and when the disease came, as it always would, Clara knows. This is all her fault. Things that happened. The decay jumped from one scientist to the next, gathering corpses quicker than the waves. They tried to burn the bodies, but there wasn't any fire in the world to stop what was coming to them. Clara and the male scientist hid in their room of screens, hastening the end of their simulations, desperate to find the solution to this apocalypse. But their ending was just that. The end.
This has been Unlike Minded, a sci-fi audio anthology. Collection 2, A Traveler's Guide, Stories about Space, Time, and Other Worlds. How to Survive the Apocalypse was written by Katie Rose Rogers and narrated by Katie McGrath. Unlike Minded is an August year-round production, created, produced, and edited by Robbie Hyne. We'd like to give a special thank you to everyone who has supported this independent podcast production. You can keep up to date and find more info about this podcast and others on Instagram at the handle AugustYearRoundProd or email us at augustyearround@gmail.com. And be sure to subscribe, leave a rating and review, and tune in next week for another episode of Unlike Minded. Thank you for listening.